Grüß, willkommen in einem Fregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 19 of my organisational series of videos. In this video I'll attempt to provide an overview of the structure and development of the Russian tank corps in World War II. The background to why I created this video, or video series, can be found in my previous video of the series, episode 18, which covers the German Panzer Division. There's no need to possess this information to view the rest of the video, but if you're interested, view episode 18 for why I created this video. The primary focus in this video is the battalion, as once I go down to company level, this TO&E would be significantly longer and more complex. I may come back and break down battalions to company levels in the future, but not in this video. Let's go through the charts that I'll be using through the video, starting with the description. This shows the typical division in a specific period, in this case the 1st Tank Corps. Yes, it's a corps, not a division, but let's put that to one side for the moment, on the 31st of March 1942. The brigade level, or equivalent, level of command is now listed here. The number of each brigades are indicated, as is its combat strength. The final formation covered is the battalion, or equivalent. The number of each battalion is indicated, in this case 2 tank battalions. Moving to the right, we come to a battalion combat strength, in this case 530, followed by the battalion code and finally combat values. Using a set of rules based on SPI Modern Battles board game, this value will be ignored in this video as it's used for a set of figure gaming rules, not this video, but the other values will be used as they provide an idea of the battalion strength, or type and strength. In front of the battalion name is a mobility symbol, which could be motorised or cycle armoured and so on. For some of the battalions, an idea of the primary weapon within is provided. In this case, this is a battalion which consists of 76mm guns. Above this entry you'll see a mixed 82mm and 120mm mortar battalion, and above this is a 37mm anti-aircraft gun. Now let's look at the combat values or strengths that I'm using in the video. This is based on a points value of that formation using a rather old set of figure gaming rules, in this case Corps Commander. I could have used any other set of rules, and while the results would vary a bit, I found they are all generally similar. Of course, how close do these values reflect reality is another issue, which in this video I'll not be covering. In the point system used, no provision for a formation's morale is taken into account. Thus, a German 41 Panzer Battalion would have a significant advantage over a Soviet tank battalion in 1941. But trying to factor that in is so subjective it would make my analysis useless. Viewers will need to take the quality and morale factors into account if they wish to compare the strength of one nationality against another. Even within the same nationalities, the troop quality, for example, of a 41 Panzer Battalion would be higher than the 39 or a 45 Panzer Battalion. Viewers really do need to make their own subjective call if they wish to perform such a chronological comparison or any other kind of comparison. In this example, the points system only reflect the men and the equipment types contained within the formation. Let's now drill into the analysis portion, starting with 1941 and specifically the German invasion of Russia. While the Russians did possess a type of tank corps back in 1939, this was short-lived, and I'll bypass this formation for the most. In 1941, the Russians deployed tank and mechanized divisions rather than corps. I'll start with the tank division, as it's interesting to compare this formation with the later tank corps. The Russians used this formation in various forms until the end of 1941, but it was quickly decided to not form new divisions, and this formation structure became what was basically considered a dead end. This table shows the 34th Tank Division in June 1941. The division consisted of an artillery regiment, motorised infantry regiment, medium tank regiment, and a light tank regiment. At the divisional level, there was a reconnaissance and anti-aircraft battalion. There is some variability in this structure, but not excessive. The artillery regiment, which was fully motorised, consisted of one light artillery battalion consisting of 76mm guns and a medium howitzer battalion consisting of 122mm howitzers. For a division-sized formation, this was rather light, but does compare with the German light divisions, for example, in 1939. The motorised infantry regiment consisted of 3 motorised infantry battalions. No big surprise here. This division contained the 67th Medium Tank Regiment, which consisted of 3 medium tank battalions equipped with BT tanks. Some of the divisions possessed heavy tank battalions which were equipped with KV tanks. This caused the Germans massive issues in the northern sector of the front line. In addition to the medium tank regiment, the division also possessed the 68th Light Tank Regiment, consisting of 3 light tank battalions. Apart from the surviving tank divisions, the Russians only formed tank brigades in 1941, but in March 1942 they once again attempted to form divisional-size tank formations, the Tank Corps. These were initially simply combining existing tank brigades, or motorised infantry brigades, together, and the initial structure shows this quite clearly. When the first Tank Corps was formed in March 1942, it was little more than 3 brigades combined under a single command. You can see the Corps assets were really non-existent, as was any form of Corps-level artillery formations. The Corps contained a single motorised infantry brigade. Unlike the old motorised infantry regiments in the 1941 tank divisions, this formation contained a reasonable amount of supporting formations, such as AA Battalion, Mortar Battalion and a light artillery battalion. The core of this brigade was its 3 motorised infantry battalions. The Corps also contained 2 tank brigades, which each possessed 2 tank battalions and a motorised infantry battalion. This was a very different structure to the old tank regiments of the tank division and allowed the brigade to operate independently if required. This was critical as cross-brigade combined arms operations were simply not viable due to a lack of skilled officers and adequate training. Beginning with the March 42 period, the corps, tank corps, were quickly being formed. This shows the 3rd Corps, which was formed in July 1942. The first notable change was the addition of corps assets, in this case an armoured car battalion. The tank brigades were also evolving. The old battalions contained a mix of heavy, medium and light tanks, which did not work very well. The result was the light and medium tanks normally separated, so the brigade now contained a light and medium battalion only. The only other change was the number of brigades that increased from 2 to 3. By December 1942, the support formations, in this case of the 6th Tank Corps, now included a rocket artillery battalion. This at least provided some indirect fire capacity for the Corps. The motorised infantry brigades remained much the same. However, each of the battalions were beefed up with additional supporting formations. The same could be said for the 3 tank brigades. The structure remained the same, but additional brigade support assets were being provided, which increased the brigade's combat strength overall, and also increased the combat or the tank brigade's flexibility. While I was intending to break this video up by years, the development of the Russian Tank Corps was so rapid, major changes were occurring each month, particularly by the end of 1942. However, by the end of 1943, the Corps structure had stabilised. The January 1943 official structure of the Tank Corps showed significant changes, even when compared with December 1942. I suspect this structure was not implemented until well after January. An AA battalion was added under Corps command in this structure. The Tank Corps now contained a number of supporting regiments, the first being a mortar regiment, which consisted of 3 120mm mortar battalions. This continued to beef up the indirect fire capability of the Tank Corps, which was always a major issue. The Tank Corps also now contained a self-propelled regiment, which consisted of 2 76mm SP battalions and a 122mm SP battalion. All of these self-propelled guns could be used as assault guns, possibly to overcome German fortified infantry positions. The 76mm armed SP guns would also have been very effective tank destroyers. The mixed SP regiments were only a short-term affair, with this being quickly replaced with a two-battalion regiment consisting of the same vehicle. I need to provide a special note about the Russian self-propelled battalions or regiments. While the Su-76 was based on an idea tried by the Russians earlier, the Su-122, Su-152, ISU-122 and ISU-152 were apparently based on the German Stug assault gun. According to some sources I've read, the Russians were impressed by the Stug 3 and used captured Stug 3s in their own army. The result was a Russian version based on the T-34 and KV chassis, mounting the 122mm howitzers and then the 152mm howitzers. While the Russians did use these vehicles in an anti-tank role, it should be noted the Russians used everything they had in an anti-tank role, so this does not indicate their primary purpose. A 122mm or a 152mm HE shell was very effective at destroying strong points in infantry defences, which is probably what they were originally intended for. Coupled with this was their low profile and thick armour, particularly of the ISU variant, which gave these vehicles the ability to get very close to their targets. Because of this, these assets were used in a special manner. While the Su-76s were generally organised into battalions, the Su-122, 152 and the ISU-122, 152 could also be organised into 2 battalion regiments. These regiments contained some motorised infantry, which I assume was provided because these vehicles were very susceptible to enemy infantry. If these regiments were ever used unsupported, they would be rather vulnerable, and this did occur in several cases. Instead of distributing these assets among brigades, they were often used as an ad hoc tank regiment, which did not normally go very well. In most cases, only a single battalion of these heavy SP assault guns were attached to a corps, with no regimental structure. The motorised infantry brigade remained much the same. However, improved equipment and additional support formations did increase the combat strength of the formation. When we look at the 3 tank brigades, they remain much the same, with only some very minor tweaking. This shows the 16th Tank Corps in May 1943, and would have been a typical corps which was involved in the Battle of Kursk. The corps support formations had grown, with an engineer battalion, a 76mm anti-tank battalion and a 45mm anti-tank battalion being added. We also see a 152mm assault gun battalion added as well. The rest of the corps structure was unchanged, with only minor equipment changes affecting anything. What is interesting is half the tanks the Russians fielded in the Tank Corps were light tanks. Moving forward to October 1943, this shows the 5th Tank Corps. Under corps control, the SP battalions had stabilised to 3, in this case the 76, 122 and 152mm SP battalion, with no regiments. While I cannot be certain, I feel these formations were mainly focused on taking on fortified German positions, as well as acting as tank destroyers, particularly the Su-76s as tank destroyers and the Su-122, 152s as assault guns. The other change which occurred was the removal of the light tank battalions, and each tank brigade now consisted of 3 tank battalions. While I'm uncertain, some battalions may have still been light, all the medium tank battalions were armed with the 76mm T-34 tank. As the Russians were increasingly facing Panther tanks, this must have been rather uncomfortable for them. However, what we are seeing here is a formation that was truly able to hold its own against the German Panzer Division, although the lack of indirect fire capability and lack of infantry to hold positions were still a major issue. We'll now move to 1944, which represented the final stage or development stage of the Tank Corps. This shows the 29th Tank Corps in January 1944. The support formations remain much the same, however some major changes in the component battalions did occur. The motorcycle battalion was really beefed up, doubling in combat strength. The 152mm heavy SP assault gun battalion was also increased in size. I suspect that was because these formations were being used so much, they were as a result beefed up. A second 76mm light SP battalion was added. The number of these formations varied a lot, and it was common to find heavy tank battalions or regiments in place of the self-propelled battalions or regiments. Otherwise, the other battalions remained much the same. When we look at the motorised infantry brigade, this remained pretty much unchanged. However, due to manpower issues, some manpower reductions did occur. The tank brigades also remain pretty much the same, but in this case additional support elements were added which increased the strength of the brigade as a whole. The infantry battalion did experience some manpower reductions. Russia in 1944 was beginning to run out of men. This shows the 18th Tank Corps in June 1944. The motorcycle battalion continued to be expanded. I expect the Russians felt their reconnaissance capability was lacking, and this was an attempt to resolve that issue. There was no changes in the mortar regiments or motor rifle brigades. The tank brigades suffered additional manpower reductions, resulting in brigade support assets suffering in terms of combat strength. The tank battalion was generally unchanged, and while they were still using the later T-34s, they were still mainly the T-34-76 medium tanks. Let's now move to 1945, the final year of the war. The core assets continue to be beefed up, with, in this case, a heavy tank regiment replacing a self-propelled regiment. We're looking at the January 1945 Russian Tank Corps structure. In 1945, the Tank Corps finally gets an artillery regiment, and while only 76mm guns were equipping it, it did provide additional indirect fire capability. There were no changes to the motor infantry brigades and mortar regiments. The tank brigades were beginning to receive the T-34-85 in significant numbers, which did beef up the strength of the tank battalions. The infantry battalions continued to suffer manpower shortages and continued to shrink. One aspect I found interesting is the lack of any major improvement in the Russian tank battalion combat strength, at least according to the point system I'm using. For most of the war, the Russians used the T-34-76 in their tank battalions, and there is little difference between a T-34-76A and a T-34-76F in terms of combat capability. The main Russian focus was reducing the cost of each T-34 rather than improving it. The Germans went down the same path with the Panzer IV in mid-1944. The result of this Russian focus is the combat strength of a T-34-76 tank battalion remained much the same during the entire war. The only main change was the introduction of the T-34-85 in significant numbers in late 1944. This did give the tank battalions a significant combat strength boost, but apart from this there was little change between 1942 and late 1944. Russian tank corps development and evolution occurred during a rather difficult time, to put it mildly. The Russians could not afford the luxury of making mistakes, and after the tank divisions were destroyed, had to start from scratch again. They first decided to rebuild the tank brigades, as well as the motorised infantry brigades. Once they had achieved a workable formation, they combined them together to form the corps. While some development and changes occurred in the tank battalions, specifically the move from a mixed battalion to a light and medium battalion, then to the final abandonment of the light battalion, and then the replacement of the T-34-76 with a much better T-34-85, these were all comparatively minor in terms of combat strength impact. The biggest change occurred in the corps support formations. You can see an increased number of support formations being added to the tank corps between March 1942 and May 1945. In terms of the ways these formations work, the brigades more often operated as a self-contained independent formation. Exchanging assets between the brigades was not common. As corps assets increased, the brigades could expect more and more attached formations to achieve specific objectives. But even in this case, some of the corps level formations often operated independently under direct corps command. The Russian Tank Corps' biggest weaknesses was officer experience, or lack of officer experience, and the lack of trained men. The Germans were experiencing the same issues in 1945, so this problem was not reserved to the Russians alone, but it was an issue with the Russians never fully solved. The Russians never really achieved the level of combined armed operation and flexibility the Germans conducted between 1941 and 1944, or the US between 43 and 45 and the British between 44 and 45. However, even with this limitation, the Russians had developed a system which worked for them and allowed them to defeat the highly skilled and experienced German army. And so we come to an end of episode 19 of my video series on the Russian Tank Corps, with a focus on the structure down to battalion level. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.